With Andor Season 2 just right around the corner, I decided to rewatch Season 1, which was even better than what I initially remembered. That usually doesn't happen to me, but I was pleasantly surprised. After watching it, I remember one video critical about the show, and that would be Robothead's video claiming that this show isn't Star Wars. So I watched through it, and I bet you can determine by seeing the video that I wasn't very impressed with the analysis of the show. And with Season 2 just looming over the horizon, there's no better time than now to respond to this garbage video, so without any further ado, let's get straight into this.
It all feels a bit wrong because it doesn't feel anything like Star Wars, which is a bit of a problem when you're supposedly making Star Wars content.
May I ask why? The problem I tend to have when people make this kind of statement is that they're subjective, fake, and often overused criticisms. As someone who's been a Star Wars fan my whole life, I feel like this show felt way more like Star Wars than anything from Disney, especially from a thematic standpoint of heroes rising from an unlikely place to rise against tyranny and oppression. That's one of the central themes of the original movies, and this show expands on that by seeing rundown cities under Imperial occupation, how the Empire operates its security, affecting the lives of citizens under its rule. We see how they run their prisons, working their prisoners to death, and giving false promises to them about one day being released. Or how they basically throw people into prisons based on faulty charges. Plus, it's nice seeing the Empire, especially the stormtroopers, being effective for once in Disney Wars. If you're going to argue based off of aesthetics because, oh no, they have bricks and screws now, well, that's one of the main issues with not just modern Star Wars, but many modern IPs. They focus solely on surface level appearance instead of actual substantive elements. That's why this show is a breath of fresh air to me. This show is Star Wars to its core thematically, and even then, there's still plenty of references to the movie, such as Rogue One, the OT, and even the EU, with mentions of the Arrakatan Empire, which is a nice nod to KOTOR among other Easter eggs. There's also planets such as Coruscant from the prequels. That doesn't come across as a show that's apathetic to Star Wars, because as we all know,
apathy is death, worse than death.
But this show doesn't dangle keys. It respects the source material while telling its more grounded, down to earth, for lack of a better term, story. I generally don't care if you don't think it's Star Wars. What truly matters is that the show is good, which it is.
So why doesn't it feel like Star Wars? Star Wars was a classic tale of good and evil, wrapped in a fantasy sci-fi adventure. And fantasy being the important bit, Star Wars is closer in tone to a wizard and dragon adventure than it is to wormholes and scientific problems. Now, I hate to break this to a lot of people, but another thing about the Star Wars universe is that it isn't real. The locations aren't real. The events aren't real. I have to explain this because a lot of people like to say things like, I want to know more about the side characters in Star Wars, or I want more Star Wars without the annoying Jedi and Sith. As if Star Wars is a real place and these other amazing stories are sitting there waiting to be discovered. It's such a bizarre way to look at art and creativity and how fiction works.
Alright, now that's just limiting creativity for the writers. Just because this show doesn't focus on the Force, Jedi, or Sith, that doesn't mean it isn't Star Wars or that it can't do what it wants as long as it has the elements that fit into the universe. And we already have other elements of Star Wars that I've already mentioned, as well as doing what I would argue is a better political story than the prequels, both in the Senate and ISB scenes, which fit perfectly into Star Wars. The fantasy aspects are just that, an aspect. There have been many good stories in the EU that don't focus on the fantasy aspect of Star Wars to tell their own stories, and plenty work. This argument comes across as closed-mindedness, not willing to give this show a chance to tell its own story, but rather a story that you want, which isn't mean to show on its own terms.
I'm always perplexed when people say they want Star Wars to move away from the Jedi and the Force, as if Star Wars has more to offer. The Jedi and the Force are the main thing that separates Star Wars from a lot of other mundane sci-fi.
Its energy surrounds us and binds us. Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter.
And look what you get when they do remove it completely. And look what you get when you see just a hint of it.
This comes across as desperation. You've been a vocal critic of The Mandalorian and The Book of Boba Fett, among other Star Wars shows. Using the soy jacks as an example to prove that Star Wars needs Jedi is nothing more than an appeal to popularity, and as I just said, desperation.
You are coping and seething. You just can't accept what you're seeing. Yes, you're coping and seething.
Plus, Luke's moment in The Mandalorian was just hollow fan service, especially since we know that Luke will still turn out to be character assassinated in The Last Jedi.
I really hope the new Indiana Jones has more school politics and more talking and less adventure. And please, can we move on from all that archaeological crap? Because I'd like to know more about the side characters, like Mutt. Please, Disney, an adult show where Mutt visits every brothel in Tijuana. Why not Back to the Future, but with less time travel? Maybe we could see how Marty's uncle ended up in jail. Maybe it could be brothel related.
Your Uncle Joey didn't make parole again.
The original Jurassic Park is a classic. Why not a backstory to the guy who died on the toilet? Seeing how he became a lawyer would be very slow and boring. And apparently, that's perfect grown-up entertainment.
Wow, what an asshole.
This is a false equivalence, since Star Wars has a much larger universe than those movies, so it makes sense that other avenues can be explored, as opposed to Indiana Jones, which is far more limited to the tone and even the world in which it establishes itself in. It's just mostly about artifact hunting, while Star Wars, in its first movie, has some political intrigue around Leia Tarkin, the criminal underworld Han and Jabba, while having fantasy elements with the Force with Luke, Vader, and Obi-Wan. Andor is comprised mostly of the former two elements, and with both underworld and political elements, as I've already explained. Once again, false equivalence. Those movies mainly focus on one aspect: time travel for Back to the Future, or genetic science for Jurassic Park. Star Wars is more versatile than that.
So yes, again, for what keeps coming up when reviewing Disney content, we see the concerning mentality of the modern Hollywood. We have adult themes forced into a show that is purely made to attract kids and families to the Disney streaming service.
We do have a lovely lady here tonight from Tahina who's got those big dark eyes you're looking for.
I don't want Garni.
Behave.
Andor is consistently rated to be TV-14, while other Star Wars shows, such as The Mandalorian, tend to be TV-14 or even just PG. This show does let you know it's meant to be taken more seriously, unlike the other shows. It utilizes its rating, or at the very least, a rating handled maturely.
And the brothel scene added absolutely nothing to the story.
I'm looking for my sister.
A story we're going to forget about in 5 minutes. Literally, 4 episodes in and he hasn't mentioned his sister again.
You just showcased this scene where he explains that Andor is looking for his sister, the main driving force for his character in the first few episodes of the show, which is how the corporal security guards see him and attempt to rob him, forcing Cassian to kill them. The lady that Andor talks to is questioned by Cyril later on, which leads them to Cassian. This chain of events and motivations is the main inciting incident of the show, so he just seems to have a very low attention span. In episode 7, Marvel convinces him that it's a lost cause that will just get him into more trouble. You know, the main point of the pointless brothel scene? His sister matters to him, which is why he's been looking for her for years, but he realizes that it's useless. Maybe it might be expanded upon in season 2, but even if it doesn't, I'll just simply say that it's mainly the instigator to get the plot rolling more than anything else.
Andor's sister, who he's trying to find, could have been working as a dish hand, or a cleaner, or a bartender, or 1,000 other jobs, and would have made zero difference to the story.
Once again, older audience.
What is going on at Disney? Why do they care so little for the people that made them the company they are? Walt must be spinning in his cryo chamber at the death of creativity and family entertainment.
All franchises try to appeal to different kinds of audiences, but Star Wars is meant for everyone. They can explore other ideas to appeal to a diverse fan base without sacrificing their pre-existing fans, which is why we have various types of Star Wars content, Rebels, Ahsoka, etc., that are meant for the known fan base. Andor manages to appeal to the different audiences without changing the core of Star Wars, as it can fit in the existing universe and does not compromise the world building established from the original 6 movies. So I fail to see how trying to appeal to more demographics is a bad thing, as long as the central core audience isn't discarded.
People who say they want a more adult version of Star Wars, or a more serious version, are really saying, I just want more shows that feature my toys, regardless of quality or tone.
What happened? Look, here's
We're
the
gonna be
thing.
fine. Listen,
I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm kind of retarded.
You haven't proven why the show isn't good, so maybe I'll just keep waiting until you make an actual point or argument.
The fucking villains were different. It wasn't always the bloody Empire.
find important.
Taking something of real value from the Empire.
Sure, I agree it's kind of irritating to see the Empire again and again, especially what Disney has done to them, but the show utilizes them so well and expands on them by showing how they maintain security for corporations and law enforcement as opposed to just the stormtroopers, which is another concept pulled from the EU.
Wars didn't look like Blade Runner. Well, now it does. Now it looks exactly like Blade Runner, and 2001, and about 20 other movies it's ripping off.
If you think that Wall-E and BMO are anywhere close to being the same outside of just being robots, I don't think I can help you at this point.
It's hard to believe Star Wars changed the look of cinema, and now all they do is copy other cinema. If Disney had the same control and attitude over the movie industry in the 80s as they do now, we would have never seen films like RoboCop, Blade Runner, Terminator, The Running Man, Escape from New York, They Live, The Fly, Repo Man, Tron, even E.T. Well, we might have got those films, but they would have been watered down, stretched out, and completely boring.
You know that Star Wars was inspired by classic movies such as Seven Samurai and Dam Busters, which is the trench run inspired by the latter. And the only thing you've claimed that Andor rips off is Wall-E of all things. So why not substantiate your point with actual evidence, please?
I do like how the terms mature and grown up are used by journalists to feign intelligence when discussing a show that's unbearably slow and boring. The films I mentioned, RoboCop, Blade Runner, Terminator, The Running Man, Escape from New York, They Live, The Fly, Repo Man, were all made and rated for adults. And they are all a blast to watch.
Oh, boo-hoo! Let me play a sad song for you on the world's smallest violin.
Saying that something is boring isn't an argument, just as saying that something is fun isn't an argument. Personal entertainment is subjective, as I said before, so I generally don't care if you find this show boring.
Game of Thrones was not made for the kids. If you have to make an adult version of Star Wars, why not something closer to that? Politics, battles, murder, sex, dragons, heads exploding. You know, actual fun things to watch. And you could just remove the sex and heads exploding and replace the swords with lightsabers, and it wouldn't be just for the adults. Everyone could have fun watching it.
This mentality is a large reason we got the sequel trilogy, so it's strange that you, of all people, are making the argument that the show should do what it can to entertain the masses while sacrificing good storytelling.
40-man regiment in the garrison.
Because they know no one's stupid enough to try it.
I don't see any shields.
That's because no one would be stupid enough to attack them.
Finally, an attempt at an actual argument, but it's still really bad. In Andor, the facility they're located isn't significant to the Empire due to being a somewhat isolated planet that is only used for distribution. And the locals of the planet are just a bunch of tribesmen with no advanced technology whatsoever. In Obi-Wan, the Fortress Inquisitorius is essential to the Empire since that's where the Inquisitors are housed. They're keeping a very important political prisoner there too with Leia. And on top of that, the place was broken into years earlier in Jedi Fallen Order, hence, the fact that security has somehow gotten worse during that time makes no sense.
The Mandalorian. Go undercover to enter an Imperial base and steal information. Everything goes wrong. Rise of Skywalker. Enter Kylo's ship undetected to steal Chewie. Everything goes wrong. The Book of Boba Fett. Enter Jabba's palace undetected to steal Slave One. Everything goes wrong. Obi-Wan Kenobi. Go undercover to enter Fortress Inquisitorius to steal Leia. Everything goes wrong. Andor. Go undercover to an Imperial base to steal money. Could it be possible that everything will go wrong?
We're not prepped for this.
We have an extra uniform. Gonna need to leave us your belt and gloves.
That's 9 for 9. I'm glad we're finally getting something new in Star Wars.
By the way, you're gay.
First, you criticized the show for not being close enough to Star Wars, but now you're saying it's too derivative of Star Wars?
Keep that same energy.
Pick one. By that moronic logic, it's Return of the Jedi bad because it has 2 different infiltration missions while rescuing Han and breaking into the base on Andor. The heist was successful and nothing went wrong. Since everything went according to plan, they did lose some people, but that was expected considering the risk.
Horns. AK-47s. They've let their imaginations go wild with this one.
That's like your one valid point. Even then, that's pretty small and ultimately inconsequential.
Oh well, who knows? This heist storyline could be the greatest Star Wars idea ever. And I might even see something I recognise. TIE Fighter!
I'm literally grasping at straws!
Wow, another contradiction. The show doesn't look or feel like Star Wars, but when we use the Star Wars tropes and elements, it's derivative. You can't pick a position to save your life, which tells me you just have an in for this show for no good reason outside that it's Disney Star Wars. Even though, unlike the vast majority of that trash, this show is actually pretty good. So there's only one valid yet minor point in this video. That just speaks to me that the show is so good that not even the most prominent critics can formulate cogent points against it. Anyway, I'm just going to cut the video here because this review has so little substance to it that making this response any longer is just a waste of time I could spend watching season 2. I just pray that it doesn't drop the ball like what happened to Arcane in its second season, and this show, outside maybe the next Jedi game to round out Cal Kestis' journey, are my last investment I have in Star Wars. So please, Tony Gilroy, don't drop the ball. I'm counting on you. Anyway, that's all for now. This is Skids, signing off.